You're listening to China Manufacturing Decoded from the Sofeast Group.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the China Manufacturing Decoded podcast. This is Renaud Angerin from Sofeast. I'm going to be your host. And earlier this year, we talked with Owen Haacke, who is the co-founder of Supply Chain Shark and an expert in, let's say, helping companies navigate US customs, tariffs, and all these topics that are really hot topics these days, right? So we talked about this a few months ago with Owen, and at that time we talked about what are import tariffs, what is the HTS code in the USA, what is the country of origin, what is the de minimis exemption. I mean, we kind of covered really a lot of the basic concepts, and Owen provided some insights and some advice. And this time, well, a lot has changed. So I thought it was a great idea to reconnect with Owen and get his take on the recent developments. So first, Owen, thanks for coming on the show. Would you mind maybe giving a quick introduction about yourself, maybe your company, so people know where you come from?
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me, Renaud. It's good to be back. My business is Supply Chain Shark. We help companies from small to medium-sized businesses and a few larger businesses that are importing to the United States and selling in the US market, and a number of them also sell globally. And we help companies basically navigate from the manufacturer and their logistics for transport, figuring out transport, and then understanding how to import into the USA, helping them navigate customs duties. I'm a licensed customs broker, so I help companies navigate all of that, and then help them understand their total landed cost and how to really keep their costs in control from the transportation side, warehousing in the USA, and then fulfillment to their final customer.
All right. Well, I bet you've been very busy recently.
Yes, we have. Yes, very busy since February.
Oh, yes, that makes sense. Yes. So last time we talked about tariff engineering, what people call tariff engineering, which is to say, okay, my product could be in this HTS code, but maybe it could also be in another HTS code that comes with a different, amount of tariff. Is this still relevant today? Let's say for someone who imports from China, there are some exemptions in some product categories, right? So is this still something that people might want to look at?
Yeah, and I think it's changed a lot in terms of from our last conversation, whereas now we have kind of a blanket additional duty on China. So you have basically the additional 145%. And when we're looking at the tariff engineering and to get into basically a different HTS code, that would mean a different general duty, which is relatively low, and that applies to, every country. And then there's the China Section 301 duties, which are an additional 7.5% or 25%. Before we had the additional 145%, it was, very important to look at the classifications to see if you potentially are in the wrong classification or if there's another one that's at a lower Section 301 duty. But right now, with the additional blanket 145, it's almost negligible, if you're able to reduce from 25 to or reduce it by the 7.5%. Not negligible. I mean, right now we're looking for all kinds of cost savings opportunities, but as you mentioned, now more important to look at the exemptions that are out there for the IEEPA, the ones that were imposed by executive order, those 145%, and looking if your product may qualify for those exemptions. So it has changed, and we're spending a lot of time working with clients that may qualify for exemptions to those duties. And I can provide a couple of examples of that. Yeah. And so for example, one of the more recent exemptions to those are for certain electronics products, and that includes semiconductors, and it also includes smartphones and tablets. So we had one client that was importing tablets that were used for kind of point of sales systems that they have at stores for a similar function as that. And he was bringing in air shipments of those products, and I think he was bringing in through FedEx, and they weren't really catching that exemption on their own. So we had him go back and instruct FedEx, to claim that exemption. So if you are in that category and you're not getting those exemptions currently, that's something to absolutely make sure that your customs broker or whoever you're using is claiming those exemptions. And those ones are pretty straightforward. And for other items, there are exemptions such as for published goods. So, books, publications. We have one client that has, in part of their product line, they have kind of children's products and board games, but they have a number that do qualify as those, publications. They're books or workbooks. We have some that are doing children's workbooks. And so making sure that they are claiming that exemption as well. And we have some clients that have a mix of those in their portfolio. And we've just been telling them, hey, well, how about, focus on those SKUs for now, or even if they want to create a couple of new SKUs in that area for the time being, because that exemption will continue because those kind of publications are exempt from those executive order imposed duties. So that's an example of another exemption. And then another one more interesting is we have a client that imports products for children with disabilities, and they saw the tariffs increase to that 145% and really created a problem for them because they don't have massive margins. And there is something called, there's a exemption has been in the books, I think, since 1993, kind of hidden.
Wow.
I had to dig it up, that allows certain products for use with people for disabilities to be exempt and at the 0% duty rate. And that includes things like wheelchairs. And originally they didn't really, see that. So there are some exemptions that you have to dig for depending on your product and its final use. So I think a lot of those are kind of coming to light now as people are really doing research on what laws and what other regulations are out there, what exemptions exist. There's some for medical devices and other products. So really doing a deep dive into those exemptions. So yeah, I think it's kind of shifted from the tariff engineering to what exemptions currently exist. And so we're focusing a lot of time on that. And a lot of products don't qualify for exemptions, but it's always good to do a review and double check.
Right. So now it's a treasure hunt for the exemptions.
Yeah. Yes. Exactly.
Educational materials for kids.
It is treasure. Yeah. It is. It is like finding treasure. Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah. That's
exactly.
Huge. Yeah. Wow. Another big thing that happened actually just very recently as we are speaking. So we're speaking as of 6th of May in China, right? So May 5 in the US, because things might change anytime. By the time this hits the publication on just in a few days on Friday. Another one is the end of the de minimis exemption for these small packages that were declared at a value under $800. They were going through US customs without any kind of inspection pretty much all the time, and without any kind of, serious, like let's say formal declaration, right? And in theory, I think not many people know that, but one of our customers told me, if some tariffs apply to a certain kind of product, even if you send a package of just $100, actually it doesn't really qualify. So it seems like it was used for all kinds of things, even when that was not strictly legal. But now it's over, right? Or is it?
Correct. So now that is over. And so companies will have to pay the dutiable amount for that shipment. And we're already seeing that for a number of our clients that send stuff via air shipment. And a lot of our clients send, a lot of our clients are importing and then have warehouses or third party fulfillment. We have a few that are using the drop shipping model, sending directly to their final customers. But a number that, have regularly brought in shipments under $800, multiple a month to kind of stock inventory. And they're now getting the bill for the duties that they would need to pay on that. So, and we've also seen some companies that have intentionally split their shipments, to send those, one a week or something like that, basically getting notices that they have to pay that dutiable amount on those now. So it has, went into effect, and this one's, not as much of a surprise because I think it was originally proposed, by the Biden administration last October. So companies have had some time to prepare for it, but I'm getting a lot of questions from businesses, particularly for, sample orders and things like that. The ones that aren't traditionally, sending directly to the final customer, that are getting those bills now for their dutiable amount. So yeah, we're seeing that, and that's currently in effect.
Yeah, right. The sample,
and yeah,
it will still be assessed at some kind of commercial value as long as it's, let's say, good enough to be sold or something, right? So are people going to do the same when sending to the USA as they do when sending, for example, to China, where they say, well, just to illustrate, I don't know, let's say it's a piece of garment, just take your scissors and cut it in the middle so it's clear it's not going to be sold in case the customs look at it, right? Are people going to start to do the same when sending samples to the USA?
Yeah, I think I've been getting a lot of questions about that and what exemptions might apply to, have it considered a sample or not. But it is tricky to bring it in because, as you mentioned, if it's a commercially viable product, and most samples are, they want to get their final sample as the final usable product for testing, for photos, for their, website or their product listings. So it's challenging to find a way around that.
Yeah, right. Okay. Well, let's see how things develop, because I think people will sort of have rules of thumb, right, about what is okay and not okay. I guess also a mess in the administration of the U.S. Customs and Border Protection. So things may not be implemented the same way, I don't know, in Houston and in Los Angeles, right? So this would take a bit of time. Just before the call, we're discussing a little bit, and you say a lot of your customers ask you, hey, I got to get out of China. I got to go to some other place really quick, right? Do they come to you with really a big sense of urgency? And what do you usually suggest to them?
Yeah, we've had a lot of inquiries over the past month, 2 months about, moving production or their supply base outside of China. And some of them have, already identified potential manufacturers or suppliers, or they come to us and they're looking for alternatives. And what I tell them, if that was something that they were already planning, long term, then maybe it makes sense to do that. But I think the ones that are coming to us and saying, hey, we need to move within 1 month, can you make it happen, Owen? And I tell them before they do that, absolutely, do the homework first on cost, even with the additional 105% duties, which of course we hope won't stick around. They need to do that cost comparison because, of course, when you're looking outside of China, you're going to have higher labor costs, higher material costs. So at the minimum, doing that actual cost analysis, and also your freight rates are higher. If you're sending from Indonesia to the U.S. or India to the U.S., it's going to be more expensive than it is if you're sending from those well-established routes between China and the USA.
Right.
And then, so sometimes you even, you do that cost comparison, and with the 145% duties, yes, China might be more expensive, but those might not be around that long. And if you say, hey, I need to move all my production within 2 months to another country, and then those go back to just I don't think, they're not going to eliminate the China duties, but when they're reduced, then you might find yourself in a more expensive situation, and you spent all that money to move time, hiring consultants, new tooling, travel to those new locations. It's a big ordeal, and few companies that have come to us, they've they kind of have plans. They talk to some manufacturers, and then we need to, the most important thing, and I think we talked about this last time, is verifying the country of origin to make sure that the product is not still a country of origin, China. And a lot of the companies that we're working with that are, have electronics components, or even plastic injection molded product components that are still coming from China, LEDs, things like that. And those are coming from China. And we were working with one company that was looking at India, but then, they were all gung ho about moving there. But then we did the country of origin analysis, and it would, even if they invested in the manufacturing in India, the country of origin would still be China. So they need to absolutely do that kind of homework for understanding that, would this be enough to change the country of origin to that other country? I'm seeing a lot of companies throw money at these new manufacturers, throwing money at setting up that relationship, hiring consultants, paying for them to make samples. And then after the fact, then they learn, oh, this actually isn't a substantial transformation, and they're not going to save any money. And they just wasted a lot of money and time, and maybe damaged their relationship with their original supplier. So yeah, I guess it's don't rush and do your homework before you do that, because you might end up in a worse situation.
Yeah. So just to clarify, when you say you looked at what the country of origin would be, etc., you're not talking about can they get a certificate of origin from that country? So, for example, India. No, you're talking in the eyes of U.S. Customs. If they look into this situation and they request documentation, evidence, etc., in their logic, this product will still be coming from China. Like the country of origin in their eyes will still be China. And that means the tariffs that apply to it will still be the tariffs that apply to Chinese products and materials. Is that correct?
Correct. Yes. Yep. Yep.
Okay.
And so,
go ahead.
Yeah, there's certain rules that customs looks at, to determine if it's substantially transformed or not, and important to understand what those are.
Yeah, right. But basically, what is for sure is that if they get all the same components from China, and then they maybe just repackage, for sure, this is not substantial transformation, right? Because the product and all of the product's characteristics were already in place there when it was still in China, right?
Exactly.
If they do some very simple assembly, okay, I get two parts and I'm going to use a screwdriver to get them together, and then I package it and that's it. That also probably doesn't qualify as substantial transformation, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And
right.
We also get the question about, software and, how does that, I had one company come to me and they said, hey, I'm going to import these tablets and then I'll put the software on in the US. So it's a made in the USA product. And I said, well, it doesn't work that way. It's when it's coming into the board. There are some cases where that could change it, but most of them wouldn't qualify, even if you're, in China and you're using software that's made in the US, that it's not going to, be a substantial transformation to that product. It's a factor to consider if you're manufacturing, but just installing the software alone, and there's examples of people trying to do that with like printers, for example, there's I think an HP printer one where they, manufactured it overseas, and then but the software was all made in the US. And there's a case where they're doing that in Mexico. And then, HP asked for a ruling, I think, to see if it would qualify as a US product, because all the software, firmware, and all that was US, but it wasn't enough to substantially transform the function of the product and the actual essential character of it.
Right. So you act like a lawyer. You go back to the old cases and you see the past rulings, because in theory the logic is still exactly the same as let's say 20 years ago or even more. Okay.
Yeah, and it's a good resource. Anyone that wants, it's public information. If you search U.S. Customs Cross, CROSS, and search your product, there's classifications rulings, origins rulings. So if you have questions about it, I recommend searching in that public database first, and you might find information on previous rulings for your products.
Yeah, and just to go back to that example of a printer. In my understanding, the printer, even without the firmware and so on, when it is imported into the USA, it will still be under the HTS code of a printer. So
correct.
That also, So okay, let's say you want to do that in India. You want to flash the firmware in India, but you import the product into India under the same HS code as you will export it. That already kind of is a flag, right?
Yeah, and they can be very complicated. The printer, maybe the plastic injection molded parts come from India or Vietnam, and then the electronic components come from China, and then the assembly happens in India, and the software is coming from the US. And you can understand, wow, this gets really complicated quick. So, some products you have to do a little bit more homework, and it's not clear. Some of them, they bring them to us, and I'm like, well, we got to do a little homework here to see exactly what transformation was completed, what's the essential character of the product, kind of looking at the overall, where did it transform. So yeah, some are very simple, very straightforward, whereas others, you definitely have to get that breakdown of your bill of materials and understand everything that was going on to make this product in whatever country it's assembled in.
Right. So if people have questions about that, basically it's a bit on a case-by-case basis, and they need to talk to someone like you, basically, right? It's not a sort of do-it-yourself, except in very clear-cut cases, right? Otherwise, it's really not a do-it-yourself kind of thing.
Yeah. I'd say, 50 to 60, 70% of the ones we're looking at are pretty clear-cut and straightforward, whereas others, you got to dig in a little bit deeper.
Right. Okay, and I think that's my last question. Except if there's something that comes up often and people ask you and you think maybe it's interesting, but I think the big question on everybody's minds is now what, right? Early May 2025, very high tariffs on China. It seems like the relationship is a bit stuck. Trump and his administration kind of hinted, okay, the tariffs are going to come down. We're going to be very nice on China, blah, blah, blah. It's going to be probably around, 40, 50% still. And at the same time, we don't know what the final tariffs are going to be on countries like Malaysia, Vietnam, India, and so on, also Mexico, because there's this 90-day period where it's stuck at only 10%, right?
Yep.
Well, should we look into the crystal ball? Do you have any thoughts about that?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. And the time is kind of ticking for those, if those will go into effect or not. And I think some of them will, for those reciprocal duties that were proposed. And so it's really put a lot of companies in a holding pattern, especially if they're looking to purchase from those other countries. And we have a number of manufacturers that we work with that, they're in China, Vietnam, Cambodia, all over the place. And it's really put a hold on some of their orders and decision-making processes. So I think that's also another important consideration. when people say, hey, I want to move from China to Vietnam real quick, it's like, hey, wait a second, look at the overall cost with the reciprocal duties, increased labor costs,
Right.
materials costs, additional freight costs. So that's the other important factor to consider are those reciprocal duties, because they're relatively high in many of the countries that companies are looking to move to.
Yeah. Yeah, you're right. Yeah, especially Vietnam was hit with what, 46%. So
Yeah.
is it really going to come down to to 5, 10, 15%? Not sure at all, right? Not sure at all.
Yeah.
There were a lot of talk, and China really warned other countries not to do that. But it seems like the Secretary of Treasury Besant said, "Hey, let's kind of put pressure on some countries like." Sort of the connector economies, as they call it, right? So, for example, Vietnam is probably the case in the, the typical case where a lot of materials from China go there to be processed a little bit and then shipped to the US market.
Mhm.
And they want to prevent that. And they're kind of putting pressure on Vietnam. I don't know what the negotiations have been like, but I guess there's going to be increased scrutiny over, the bill of materials of all these products going to Vietnam. And certainly I guess it would be harder to get a certificate of origin in Vietnam or even in Malaysia, Cambodia, some other places like that. But so first, does that make sense to you? And number two, does the US Customs even pay attention to a certificate of origin from one of these countries?
That's a good question. And on the first one, on pressure, the U.S. administration now is trying to put pressure on other countries to increase their import duties on products coming from China. And I don't think they'll see much success in that, because, and that includes, consumer markets too, Europe, Canada. And I don't think they'll see much success in that. So I guess, another point there is that, for companies that are manufacturing in China, those countries that they're selling to, aren't necessarily going to increase their dutiable rate. So a lot of our clients, and this is kind of a tangent, but a lot of our clients are, kind of focusing on selling to those markets other than the US for the time being. And a
Yeah.
number of them are diverting their advertising from the US to those other markets, right? Which I think is some of them almost completely cut their advertising in the US, and they're focusing on, Canada, Europe, Australia, other markets that they're selling into. So, but there is that pressure from the administration, but I think I think I'll have very limited success in that, because other countries are seeing the negative impact it's having on the U.S. economy, and we're going to feel a lot of that negative impact here in the next month or so, after all the orders that were canceled, months ago are not going to arrive, and there'll be inventory shortages and things like that. So on the pressure side, and for the markets, the other manufacturing markets, I think the origin, looking at the origin, the scrutiny is really coming down to the looking at that bill of materials and the valuation of the product when it's coming in. The certificate of origins can be helpful for those that are claiming free, preferential treatment under free trade agreements, which, many of those do exist, right? So it's a factor if you're looking for preferential treatment, but ultimately you have to be able to prove that your product meets the country of origin requirements according to U.S. Customs. And one important thing that every company should do is, in addition to any documentation that the manufacturer can provide, including maybe it's an official certificate of origin from their commerce department, is it's vital for businesses to, before they, start sending orders to a new manufacturer, to conduct a factory audit and make sure that they're actually, make sure that they have the equipment to produce it first and foremost, right? So if you go there and they're like, hey, they don't have an electronics assembly line, but they're claiming that it's made in Vietnam, then there's your answer. That, and if they
right.
can't, right, or unless they have partners or, but you need to do a factory audit of everyone that's in that manufacturing process in that new country. That's almost more important to doing your own homework to if they manufacture it or not. And something to keep in mind is if, U.S. Customs finds out that ABC company in the U.S. is buying products from a Vietnam XYZ company, and then they find out that this US based company, they figure out that the country of origin is inaccurate, they can look and see who else is buying from that same manufacturer or supplier. So they know everyone else that's purchasing that same product, the country of origin is inaccurate, right? So they have all that data, and that's a quick and easy way for them to, and so if you're like, hey, I'm small beans, I'm a small business, but if you're a manufacturer, I'm sure they're selling to bigger clients, and one of them gets caught for not doing their country of origin homework, then you can too. And it's just a matter of investing in doing that homework, because it's easy as a smaller business to say, they provide the documentation, it looks good, and to say, okay, this is a country of origin, Vietnam. And so in some part, I feel bad for these small business owners because they don't maybe know all the homework that they need to do to verify that themselves, because the onus is on them to do that. So yeah, certificate of origin at the end of the day doesn't carry too much weight. You need to do your own homework to really verify it.
Yeah, absolutely. I would add also, during production, if you can visit or send an inspector and document what you see, that also is another layer of evidence that they actually did that work in that country, in that exact facility.
Yeah.
Right? So anything you can do basically on your homework, right, to clarify what really happened. I think that's the big takeaway here.
Yeah, we have a good partner. That's one service that we offer: factory audits, inline inspections during production, and pre-shipment inspections globally in most of those manufacturing countries as well. We have a really good partner that does that, and we've been really pushing that hard for anyone that's finding a new manufacturer.
Yeah, that makes sense. All right, well, that was very, very, very useful, I think, for listeners. A lot of them are caught in this difficult situation, so pretty interesting advice. If people want to reach out to you, where do they find you? Do they search Supply Chain Shark? What is the best way?
Yep, Supply Chain Shark, and then look me up on LinkedIn, Owen Haacke on LinkedIn, or shoot me an email. It's owen.h@supplychainshark.com.
Great. All right. Thank you so much, Owen. And well, let's keep in touch, because who knows, situation might change a lot again.
Absolutely.
Thanks so much.
Thank you, Renaud.
Thanks for coming on the show, and thanks for the listeners. And you will hear from us as usual next week.
Thanks again for listening to this podcast, brought to you by the Sofeast Group. We're on a mission to provide you with everything you need to manufacture effectively in Asia, including inspections, auditing, new product development support, contract manufacturing, 3PL warehousing and fulfillment, and much, much more across Asia's key manufacturing areas. Visit us at sofeast.com, that's SOFEAST.com, to learn more and get help. If you've enjoyed the podcast today, please do rate, review and share, because it will really help others discover us too.